Oh, hello, yeah. Well, will the snows never cease? Well, yes, indeed. And they will once we get to those sunlit uplands, as they used to say about 20 years ago. Yes, indeed. And of course, the people who lead them there are reform with their go-getting style. Well, definitely great policies. And certainly we're seeing a lot of this in their local governments. And I know that, people have been poo-pooing reform councils, but if you look at some of them, well, they're really operating at full speed. And today we're going to look at, Cornwall, who have decided, as a group of reform councillors, stylies, to get rid of EDI, or as you might better know it, DEI, diversity, inclusion and equality style policies. Yes, can't have any of that. Can we? No, indeed. They've decided that that's a very bad thing. Not really quite sure why, because, basically it's a Lib Dem council, because they've kind of lost, their leader and their deputy leader recently, and they've had about 4 councillors that have formed an independent group because they say that, the stuff that's coming out of London that they're supposed to do is totally unworkable. But I guess they're just traitors to the cause. Yes, indeed. And of course, we do hear a lot in the British media about DEI stuff, all that awful things whereby they give jobs to black people even though they're totally unqualified. Yes, you probably noticed a lot of that in the NHS with all those foreign doctors and other things like that who probably shouldn't be there, should they? Somehow. Anyway, they've decided to do that. But there are just 1 or 2 problems. Well, 1 or 2 indeed, with such thoughts. I mean, not the least of which is it's not going to happen. But according to Cornwall, the obviously quite traitorous officers there themselves, there's only actually 4 people involved in DEI or EDI stuff for, near enough 6,000 people working in the council. It's basically a lot less than 1%. And even if you get rid of them, they'll still have jobs because, it's a statutory requirement, the things that they do. You see, the problem with disliking things when, they come out of the States, this idea of, you couldn't possibly have a woman flying a plane because obviously it'll crash, and you can't possibly have black people in the military because, they'll just be listening to rap music all the time rather than fighting the enemy or something. All of those kind of notions, a la Charlie Kirk. Well, you do actually sort of run into a few problems because in this country we do have something called the Equalities Act, which of course you will know is something really, really dreadful because it just makes everyone trans. But apart from that particular thing, what the Equalities Act, from about 15 years ago did was group all the other equalities legislation together. What equalities legislation? Well, all that tricky stuff about paying women the same as men for the same work, which, after all, I'm sure even Reform would kind of think that that's not a bad idea. It's these statutory requirements. That's the thing. This is stuff that's been on the statute books for most of my life, and it has to be done. Now, you might not like the idea of, because you've heard of some internship that goes to a black person in the BBC, you might not like EDI because you don't really like black people. And that's the key thing. It's usually that. But it also goes to, don't really like gay people either. So we don't really see why the council should do anything for gay people, even though, they pay rates the same as everyone else, which is one of those odd things that Darren Grimes certainly hasn't quite got his head round. I don't know why he doesn't want any money spent on people like him. It's a mystery that only Darren cannot think about because he doesn't. Darren, of course, is the one that refused to go on his EDI training, allegedly, but I think it's actually a requirement for the job. You may well be in a job where you have to do the same thing. You might not agree with these things, but it's very, very hard to actually argue against them, especially, when it's a statutory requirement. And, sometimes I find myself sort of talking to people about stuff like this, that they just have that kind of, I've seen it in the Daily Mail and it's bad thing. But when you say to them, do you want to have, no monitoring of who's at your workplace at all? You could do that. You could get rid of all of that legislation so you just don't have any monitoring of what's going on. But then you might well find that, all of the people that your managers are all mates of the same person that is your boss, who, they all went to the same public school, all of them. And nobody can do anything about it because, of course, obviously they were just hired on their merit, because they always are, aren't they? That's basically what we're dealing with here. We're not dealing with whether or not you like trans people. that isn't the issue. It's about whether or not we're actually meeting compliance in terms of what we have to do. And, speaking as somebody who has run a couple of schools in my time, it's a bit of a minefield, and I want someone that's qualified to make sure that I'm doing the right thing, because I don't want to be hauled up, in an employment tribunal if I haven't done the right, EDI policies. And that's why these people are employed. It's not to push any sort of agenda, despite what you might see on GB News, despite what, Richard Tice, who after all knows everything about real estate, because after all he just does, what he might say. It's a problem, isn't it? What you need to do is make sure you comply with the law. Now, you can, at a national level, change the law. But we know where that's going to go, because, in very much the same way as, reform seems to be becoming chocker full of public schoolboys, because basically that's what they are. Look at the backgrounds of their MPs. It's far, far higher in terms of the public schoolboys that they are compared to even the Conservative Party, compared to even the Labour Party, which is pretty high. And that's what you'll get. Still, never mind, you can always be persuaded that, there was that one internship at the BBC that you heard about, and it sounded a bit iffy, and anyway, it's all about racism against white people, and you don't like it. Okay then, do buy into that if you want to. But from someone like me, it just looks a bit, performative, what we used to call virtue signalling in my day. Absolutely hot air, meaningless tosh that has come out of, the glorious leaders posterior, and the rest of them have to run around with it. But unfortunately, for example, like with those uppity Cornish independent types, that's what they're going to do. They're going to become independent, and they're just going to say, no, we were employed to do things locally, not some stupid net zero scheme which has no benefit to anybody whatsoever. Traitors. Do have a lovely stay warmy type day if you can do. My weekend personally starts here. Yay! Oh, the joys of cancelled lessons. Yes, that'll cost the taxpayers, won't it? Boo and hiss. Do have a lovely one.